السلام عليكم.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم، والحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستنصره ونستجيره ونستهديه ونستشيره ونستعينه ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه. فإنه حق من هداه الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، له الحمد وله الشكر، ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد النبي الأمين خاتم الرسل والأنبياء أجمعين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى أصحابه المختارين، وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم يا علي يا عظيم يا رب، اللهم اصلح لنا ديننا الذي هو عصمة أمرنا، واصلح لنا دنيانا التي فيها معاشنا، واصلح لنا آخرتنا التي فيها معادنا، واجعل الحياة زيادة لنا في كل خير، واجعل الموت راحة لنا من كل شر يا علي يا عظيم. Once we take seriously the burden and the obligation and the duty the burden, the obligation, and the duty of testifying in the path of God for the sake of justice, or testifying in the path of justice for the sake of God. Once we understand that the construction that Allah presented us with, that whether you walk in the path of God for the sake of justice, or you walk in the path of justice for the sake of God, the two are interchangeable and indistinguishable. Once you understand that God is not about communal activities that affirm the sense of identity. God is not about Muslim camps in which people come together, indulge in gossiping, and effectively in ghaiba and namima, in chitter-chatter, and endless talking about this and that. Once we understand that the path is not in Islamic conferences in which we come together, say what already has been heard a million times, where we affirm things that we already know, where we come unchallenged and leave unchallenged, where we come to serve the ego and leave having served the ego. Once we understand that the path of God is not indulgent performances in the gymnastics of Arabic, that we It is not about coming together, competing, and who can enunciate the most forced and contorted Arabic without an iota of meaning. It is not even about reciting the words of the Quran without any comprehension or any real aspiration, to digest and process and develop the meaning of the Quran. It is not about hadith competitions where we come together and indulge in the art of hadith hurling, back and forth, who can cite the hadith and try to impress everyone else by making sure they mention who is the rawi of the hadith and where it might be, whether it's Bukhari or Muslim, where in the books of Isnad and Sunan it might be found. Once we get beyond all the ostentatious displays of piety to the stark realization that if you are with God, if you traverse and walk the path of God, you have committed yourself to the path of justice. And for a Muslim, if you walk the path of justice and pursue the path of justice, by definition, you are also committed to the path of God. What a revolutionary idea. What an astounding, earth-shattering idea. Whether you bear witness for God or you bear witness on behalf of justice, it is one and the same. Indeed, if you listen to the Quran, and instead of the monotonous reciting of the Quran that so many Muslims excel in, they get together in Laylat al-Qadr, they get together in the occasions of Ashura, or they get together in the rites of Ramadan, and there is so much reciting of the Quran. With all the recitings of the Quran that are heard all over the Muslim world and all over the non-Muslim world, it begs the obvious question: what does it mean? What does it mean that Muslims are capable of coming together in assemblies, reciting the Quran, hearing the Quran being recited, and yet, year after year after year, they come, they recite, they depart, and nothing in terms of the relationship of Muslims to justice changes. And indeed, nothing in terms of the relationship of Muslims to Allah changes. And the reason that nothing in the relationship of Muslims to their Lord changes is precisely because nothing in terms of the relationship of Muslims to justice changes. Imagine if we raised our children with this consciousness. Imagine if we raised our children with the firm belief that your time on this earth is limited, and that when you die, there will be a record. And yes, the record will reflect how many times you kept up with your salah, and the record will reflect every act of ibadah that you've undertaken. But son or daughter, that is only the starting point, and it is woefully inadequate. Because the real record, what will make your record not merely a passing D, but puts you in the realm of possible B's and A's, is your relationship to justice. How you've navigated and in various situations negotiated the demands of justice upon you. And my son, my daughter, the real challenge and the real task and the real mission is to see the Lord, the face of your Lord in justice. That, my son, my daughter, takes a lot of hard work. The face of your Lord is not in the number of akis you can utter. The face of your Lord is not in the pietistic displays that are engaged in Islamic centers all the time. The face of your Lord is not even in a hijab or a beard or in the mechanical repetition of alleged sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ. The face of your Lord and the path to falling in love with your Lord, the path to falling in love with your Lord is to understand, to comprehend, to internalize the extent to which your Lord loves justice. Indeed, my son, my daughter, there is no venue for truly understanding what your God is about or who your God is or what your God truly wills, the will of the divine, you have no hope of building any type of meaningful relationship with the will of the divine unless you understand that it is justice that your Lord loves. It is justice that your Lord demands. It is justice that is the actual manifestation of the mercy and the compassion of your Lord. Without justice, all talk about Allah's mercy and all talk about Allah's compassion become meaningless. How can there possibly be a way for you or me or our children to understand in what ways is Allah Rahman and Rahim? What ways is Allah Rahman or Rahim when there is no justice? When your relationship to justice has become disconnected and alienated. Because justice is but a necessary step for ihsan. And the ihsan of your Lord, the ihsan of your Lord is the true embodiment of the beauty of your Lord. In order to even come close to the realm of ihsan, you must first understand why you love justice and why you bear witness for justice and behalf of justice as you bear witness for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is this, the relationship, which opens the gates for the next development. The development of a relationship with ihsan. With beauty. We human beings, while we have an innate sense of what is just, as we have an innate sense of our Lord, both of our innate senses, our innate sense towards justice and our innate sense of the Lord, the fitrah that binds us to justice and the fitrah that binds us to Allah, are thoroughly corruptible. They're thoroughly corruptible by social institutions, by cultural practices, and by the tyranny of the tyrannical ego. But in order to reach ihsan, in order to reach that comprehension of the relationship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to beauty, and what it means when Allah tells us that Allah loves al-muhsineen, in order to even come close to that, first you must repair and mend and heal and fix your intuitive consciousness and intuitive comprehensions of both your Lord and justice. Isn't it all too obvious that if you are a human being, that you claim to have a relationship with God, you claim to be pious, you claim to be observant, you claim to be religious, isn't it all too obvious that when on the basis of these claims, you also claim to be among the muhsineen, those who accomplish acts of virtue and beauty? If your relationship to justice is severed or corrupted, isn't it all too obvious that your claim about ihsan is nonsensical? Indeed, it is impossible. How can you hope to have any comprehension of the ways that Allah is beautiful and loves beauty, in the ways of what true ihsan means, if you don't even have a relationship to justice? If it has not been woven in the very fabric of your being, what it means to pursue justice for the sake of God and to pursue God for the sake of justice. Our Muslim Ummah lacks ihsan and all the earmarks of ihsan wherever you turn. I say, although I feel sad for all the acts of ugliness that I've encountered in my career with the Muslim Ummah. But what a lot of people don't realize is that when they slander you, they malign you, they backbite you, they are donating of their hasanat to you. And by that measure, I owe them gratitude, because so many have donated so many hasanat to me as I sit doing absolutely nothing but receiving their hasanat. But the issue is not my own experience. And the issue is not whether I'm getting hasanat or not. The issue is understanding why we are where we are, and jahd al-qariha, expending every part of your intellect and learning in understanding what we need and what must be done to renew our covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hopefully, to correct the path and to be worthy of being truly the people of God, the party of God, Hizbullah, as the Quran describes it. Obviously, I'm not talking about Hizbullah in Lebanon. I'm talking about the Quranic concept of Hizbullah. Haven't you asked yourself, why is it that so many Muslims who are extremely successful in their professional careers will tell you story upon story upon story about how they were bruised and alienated and hurt in their encounters in Islamic communities and Islamic centers? How many of our youth have attended Islamic schools only to grow up ever more resentful towards Islam? How many will tell you the vast silent majority of Muslims that they no longer go to Islamic centers because they find the experience bruising or demeaning or degrading or dull and boring, because there's nothing that these spaces contribute in terms of intellect, ideas, and thought. The answer, quite clearly, quite obviously, is our Muslim spaces lack ihsan. They lack the vestiges, the earmarks of virtue, goodness, and beauty. But then, why do they lack the earmarks of goodness, virtue, and beauty? Wherever human beings go, and they encounter virtue, goodness, and beauty, their soul thrives, their spirit expands. They can't get enough of it. Even if they were raised wrong, intuitively, they gravitate towards it. Why? The error, the problem, starts with the fact that we fell in the demonic delusion, that we can somehow walk the path of God, testify for the sake of God, while not worrying about justice. And let me be very specific here. intuitively, we know that when you treat women as a subordinate group of people, when the attitude in our Muslim spaces towards Muslim women is one of subordination and marginalization, we know that that's not just, regardless of what theological trappings you ascribe to it to try to justify it. We know that when we make Muslim spaces a place where talents and intellectual inquisitiveness and the love of learning go to die rather than grow, that's not just. We know that when we put forward in Muslim spaces those who give khutbahs, those who do the teaching, those who give the lectures, not the most qualified, not the most learned. In fact, the more professionally accomplished in the world of intellect and thought they are, the more scary they are to us, the more we exclude them from our spaces. Because the doctors and the engineers that run Muslim spaces find those with real learning threatening. We know that this is not just. When the measure let me strike that. When we know the prime motivator for who is in or out in Muslim spaces is nothing more honorable than simple jealousy. The dunces, the intellectually dull, the intellectually ignorant are consistently threatened by anyone with any semblance of real knowledge, leave alone critical thought. And so what happens in Muslim spaces day in and day out is that the most untalented, or put differently, the least talented, and in fact, the most alienated from any semblance of ihsan, come together to neutralize Muslim spaces of anything challenging or competitive. And so what happens? Sociology is testimony from God. You tell me what happens to the most intelligent Muslims, the most accomplished Muslims. Do they stick around Muslim spaces? Or do you find that in the most prestigious institutions, there are people with Muslim names that say things and are fond of saying things like, yeah, I'm of Muslim origins. And when you dig into their story, you find the same old, same old. Once upon a time, They experimented with finding for themselves a niche in Muslim spaces, but they were pounced upon. And basically, it's as if Muslim spaces hang up a sign. If you have an intellect, if you have a brain, if you care about justice, if you are interested in even a slightly subtle discourse about justice, you are not welcome. When you can travel from one Muslim space to another, and you find in none of these spaces the semblance of awareness of the emblematic relationship between the path of God and the path of justice, and the fact, without a passion for justice and a passion for God, Ihsan is not even a possibility. When you find that we never mention to our children the word virtue, we never teach them the art of akhlaq, rather than give them examples of quote-unquote husn al-khuluq, good akhlaq, from examples that are taken from hundreds of years ago, examples that hardly relate to any lived reality. When we tell them that akhlaq is to say assalamu alaikum to every Muslim brother and sister, but immediately they learn that the same adults who teach them to say assalamu alaikum and tell them that this akhlaq frequently indulge in ghaiba and namima, that although the Quran describes it as eating the flesh of your brethren, that wherever they turn, they find the very Muslims that taught them that salam is part of akhlaq have no reserve and hardly restrain themselves from indulging in engorging on the flesh of their fellow Muslim. Every time there is ghaiba and namima, it is consuming the flesh of your brethren. To be a good Muslim is to have good manners. Good manners. But the true irony and the true paradox in what Islam is consistently used to justify and explain and justify and defend the absence of good manners. Look, It is a matter of good manners that you honor your word. That if you say you will do, you in fact do. That people learn to rely on what you say. Yet, in Muslim spaces, you can hardly count on the word of a Muslim. It is very painful. But Muslims are among the most unreliable with their fellow Muslims. And the irony is that the same individual who is so unreliable could be very reliable with non-Muslims. Why? There is some twisted demonic influence in our brains that somehow, Islamic niceties, Islamic bondness, being bonded Islamically, should forgive my ill manners. Oh, I'm a fellow Muslim, just forgive it. In my journey, even in the journey that I've had with the Quran, the past 2 years, you cannot imagine the amount of abuse and slander and sheer ill manners that have been poured on the head of someone who has decided to do nothing more than not just teach the Quran, but pay people for learning the Quran. I don't mind saying that as an expression of gratitude for all the Quranic learning and all the Quranic teaching, Muslims, they do not refrain, they have no shame in describing this as a cult. What type of cult pays people to learn? Not asks students for money, but actually pay them to learn. But yet the same Muslims who will have convulsions in discussions about their hijab will have no reserves, no reservations, no qualms about this ill-mannered behavior. Is clearly an indulgence in injustice. And in fact, if they're on a plane that's going to crash, they would admit to themselves that they know that this is unjust, that this is nothing more than an indulgence in their ego. Why recognize that anyone has an original thought about anything? I don't have original thoughts, and if I don't have original thoughts, then no other Muslim should have original thoughts. That's the affair we're in. Our very relationship to the symbiotic relationship between divinity and justice has been broken. And as a result, we have no relationship whatsoever to ihsan, to virtue, and high morals. And that is why, if you are among those Muslims who find yourself well treated, respected, as a good human being outside Muslim spaces, but when you stepped in Muslim spaces, you found yourself bruised, alienated, mistreated, disrespected, and you've wondered why. Why is it that I don't feel comfortable with my Muslim brothers and sisters? Why is it that I feel as if once I step in these spaces, I'm in some type of bizarre competition to prove my worth because everyone else seems intent on sending me the message that they're superior to me somehow? And you've wondered why. If you are among those people, then please understand that all these people are ill-educated Muslims. So ill-educated that their relationship to Islam is tangential at best. They can listen to the Quran, they can recite the Quran perhaps, maybe, without any comprehension of its meaning, without any understanding of what it says. They are Quranically illiterate. But not only that, but they don't want anyone to tell them that they're Quranically illiterate. And if anyone dares come and tell them that they're Quranically illiterate, they lash out with venom and hate and pettiness. Please understand that it is because they failed in the most basic step to walk in the path of God in the pursuit of justice, or to walk in the path of justice in the pursuit of God, one and the same thing. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. صلى الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Of course, again, every week screams at us the extent to which collectively as Muslims we have fallen off the path of justice. As usual, this week witnessed Israelis killing more Palestinians. A 15-year-old was just killed in the city of Qalqilia. 15-year-old Palestinian shot dead, and another teenager, Palestinian teenager, critically wounded by Israeli gunfire. This week, in the city of Huwaira, some Palestinian attacked Israeli settlers with a knife. As a result, Israeli settlers, protected with the Israeli army, went on a rampage, beating, killing, injuring, burning Palestinians and their properties. The attack was so grotesque and so massive that even the typically silent world was forced to notice because of the extent of destruction and injury caused by this attack. In fact, one of the saddest stories is a Palestinian, a 37-year-old, who lived in the village of Zatara. This 37-year-old, and I was trying to find his name, but Samih al-Aqtash, volunteered to go help with the aid activity, rescue activity in the earthquake in Turkey. He had just finished a stint rescuing people trapped because of the earthquake in Turkey. And he had just returned back to his home in Palestine. But when Israelis went on a rampage, burning, shooting, and killing, they shot this fellow. 300 homes burned to the ground, despite the fact the town of Zatara was 6 kilometers from Huwara, where the attack by Palestinians, where the crime committed by Palestinians against Jewish settlers happened. Despite the fact that this city was 6 kilometers away, settlers attacked the village of Zatara, shooting and beating Palestinians indiscriminately, protected by the Israeli army. And then they shot Aqtash, who was a father of 3 children. The youngest is a 4-month-old girl. And then they prevented ambulances from reaching the location. Aqtash's brother took him in his own car and tried to rush him to the hospitals. Israeli settlers stoned the car and tried to prevent it from leaving the scene, until by the time Aqtash was brought to the hospital, he had died. Most of the lands around Huwara and Zatara were confiscated by Israel to build illegal Jewish settlements, and various roads exclusively for Israelis that were constructed to serve them and maintain their security. In the attack against Huwara, the scenes of what the Israeli settlers, protected by the Israeli army, did look like mayhem. Homes burned, cars burned, hundreds of Palestinians injured. I actually don't know the number of people killed, but I had read it and forgotten it. Meanwhile, an Israeli minister, Bezalel Smotrich, declared in an interview that Israel should wipe out Palestinians in Hawara completely, should eradicate Palestinians from existence. He called for the burning of homes and killing of all Palestinians. Now here's the doozy. What he said was so egregious that Jewish groups that are normally silent were forced to condemn what this Israeli minister said. But this Israeli minister is scheduled to come to the US. Now let me be very clear. Incitement to hatred of ethnic, racial, or national groups, incitement to violence against a people, and especially a people under occupation, is a violation of international law. For instance, Article 20 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights explicitly provides that incitement to hate or incitement to violence against a religious group, an ethnic group, a racial group is a violation of human rights. So an American law, American immigration statute, says that those who advocate violence against a religious group or a racial group are excludable, meaning they're inadmissible, meaning they should not get visas to come to the United States, leave alone live in the United States. And yet, the Israeli minister will come to the United States. And the only real reaction is that the Biden administration sort of suggested informally that if he requests an audience with the White House, he will be denied an audience. Meanwhile, as all of this is going on, Israel has taken a step further in passing a clearly, indisputably racist, egregiously racist law. By a vote of 55-9, a draft law that which imposes the death penalty for a person who causes the death of an Israeli citizen when the act is carried out from a racist motive with the purpose of harming the state of Israel and the rebirth of the Jewish people in their homeland. So, if you kill a Jew, you get the death penalty. But if you kill an Arab, or a Palestinian, you don't get the death penalty. Of course, like time and again, why do I mention this? Well, largely because no one else does. Why do I talk about this? Because Muslim spaces, their relationship to justice has become so skewed that they don't even notice the plight of their fellow Muslims. Let me put it bluntly. Where is the country with the Ministry of Tolerance? Isn't it obvious that it is because of what the country with the Ministry of Tolerance has done in validating the Israelis, in telling the Israelis, you can abuse Palestinians as much as you want, and that's not going to affect anything. Isn't it obvious that all of this began with the election of President Trump, when Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, and when Trump had Kushner go around with his peace plan, and the peace plan undeniably, not even concealing the fact, involved the total abandonment of Palestinians. You Emirat, you Oman, you Saudi, you Sudan, you Tunisia, make peace with Israel and let the Palestinians fend to themselves. Isn't it obvious that after that happened, the Israelis elected the most right-wing, the most racist, the most extremist government to date? And the escalation of their violence and racism against Palestinians reached unprecedented levels. Where are the Americans who are the apologists and defenders of the country with the Ministry of Tolerance? Where is their voice? Why does it fall upon bad Khalid Abul Fadl to constantly speak for these people when no one else does? Where is Hamza Yusuf and his smug silence before these atrocities? Where is all the venerable Muslim organizations? What are they saying about it? Do you hear them talking about it? Do you hear them expressing even outrage? Nothing. Nothing. Israel has become increasingly an apartheid state that regularly brutalizes Palestinians. We've abandoned the Aqsa Mosque. We've abandoned Palestinians. We've allowed the Saudis to build from the Kaaba to the Mukaab. So we've abandoned the Kaaba. We've abandoned the historical sites in Al-Hijaz completely. But do you know what? I wish it stopped there. The Rohingyas. Do you know that the United Nations cut aid to the Rohingyas? And when I talk about aid to the Rohingyas, I am talking about food and blankets and security personnel to prevent the abduction of the Rohingyas and selling them into sexual slavery. Muslims, The United States cut their aid by the United Nations cut their aid by 1/3. More Rohingyas are now dying of starvation than ever before. Why did the UN cut their aid by 1/3? Because Muslim countries have cut their contributions. And the UN has said, we're very sorry, but the money that was pledged by the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Kuwaitis, they haven't delivered on any of this money. We're forced to let the Rohingyas die because countries that promised money didn't pay. This is mean at the time that Saudi Arabia is building the Neom whatever. This is at the time that the apologists for the UN love to go around pretending, the apologists for the United Arab Emirates go around pretending that the United Arab Emirates is a beacon of tolerance and hope. I will close with one final example, because Allah, well, I'm sorry, I have to tell you. Do you know that recently, as much as 10 Saudi judges, the state is seeking to execute as much as 10 Saudi judges. Just recently, the very prominent member of Al-Nahda, the Islamist Renaissance Party in Tunisia, Saeed al-Farjani, was arrested by the Tunisian authorities. May Allah protect him. I hope they don't torture him or mistreat him. But are we oblivious to the fact that Tunisia had a revolution, that Tunisia dreamt of democracy, that Tunisia elected an Islamist party into power, and that the reason Tunisia has descended into dictatorship and authoritarianism is thanks to the Emirat? Are we oblivious to this fact? Just like Egypt descended into dictatorship thanks to Saudi and the Emirat, just like the Syrian revolution failed thanks to Saudi and the Emirat, Saeed al-Farjani sits in prison today because the Emiratis and Saudis sent a clear message to the Tunisian government. If you don't drop this democracy nonsense, if you don't jail your Islamists, if you don't adopt authoritarianism, we will suffocate you economically. We will destroy you financially. Pray for Saeed al-Farjani. Finally, there is a Zionist organization called TZAC, Zionist Advocacy Center. They're based in New York. TZAC has been doing something now for about 5 years or more. They track American and non-American organizations that are helping Palestinians directly or indirectly. and using something called the False Claims Act of the False Claims Act. What this act is that a lot of these organizations that try to help Palestinian refugees and Syrian refugees, they will often ask the United States government for money. And then they use this money to try to build schools and hospitals, irrigation systems for Palestinians and other refugees. Well, the Zionist organization, TZAC, has taken to bringing lawsuits against these organizations that try to help Palestinians under the False Claims Act by effectively saying these organizations lied to you, U.S. government, when they told you that they're going to do charitable work. In reality, they're doing anti-Israeli work. In reality, they're helping terrorists. Now, the definition of helping terrorists is so loose that basically, so they TZAC brought lawsuits against the Carter Center, the center created by Jimmy Carter, the late president of the US, and brought a lawsuit against Oxfam, and brought a lawsuit against the Norwegian People's Aid Organization. And most recently, they brought a lawsuit against Christian Aid, a UK-based organization. The UK, the Christian Aid Organization, in order to get American money, signed an anti-terrorism certification, meaning I am going to use this money, but I'm not going to use this money to support terrorists. Well, TZAC brings these lawsuits knowing that, as happened with Oxfam, and as happened with the Carter Center, and as happened with Christian Aid, that ultimately these lawsuits will be dismissed. That ultimately courts will find that there are no grounds for these lawsuits. So why do they bring them? Because defending against these lawsuits is very expensive. And it sends a clear message to any organization that wants to help Palestinian refugees. In the case of Christian Aid, they were actually helping Syrian refugees. They were helping Syrian refugees. But TZAC still brought a lawsuit against them. And defending the lawsuit cost Christian Aid £700,000. After 5 years, the lawsuit was dismissed. But what is the effect? All the money that are spent on legal fees defending against the lawsuit is money not helping refugees. Now, I beg you, look at something like TZAC. Do you think it is doctors and engineers who populate an organization like TZAC? Do you think it's Muslim lawyers who are worried about, I want to have a child, I want to have a car, I want to have a bigger house? Do you think it's lawyers who care about their careers? TZAC is manned by ideologues, legal eagles who are ideologues. They do a very difficult technical job. Bring frivolous lawsuits. on the basis of very technical American law. But for these lawsuits to cost, for the defense against these lawsuits to cost this much money, you must have a lot of legal skill. To keep the frivolous lawsuit going on for 5 years, you must have a lot of legal skill. These people have no time to slander one another. These people have no time to make promises that they make promises and then break them. These people have no time playing house in artificial spaces where they pretend like they can recite the Quran or know the Quran. These people have a cause. These people serve their cause. It's the wrong cause. It's an immoral cause. But they serve their immorality far better than we serve our morality. I remember when Trump was elected, I saw the writing on the wall. I saw that what is known as lawfare, lawfare is meaning waging war through law, was what is going to take place in the future. So I had a very rational proposal that rational people would make. We Muslims must get together, start creating in a very systematic, professional way, consolidating funds, building a legal fund, so that when the war through law comes, the lawfare comes, we can hire the best legal minds to defend everyone that needs to be defended, and perhaps even to bring some lawsuits of our own. There was a meeting, and it was absolutely a disaster. Do you know why it was a disaster? Because every representative, all they cared about is that you brought up the idea first, and they wanted to basically jealousy, nonsensical envy. Everyone gave a speech. The gist of the speech is, well, you didn't think of anything special. This is nothing special. Oh, it's already being taken care of. Oh, I already have a fund. Oh, maybe, no, we don't need the fund. Oh, we need a fund in maybe 100 years. Oh, there was a fund maybe 100 years ago. Everything. But actually accomplishing anything. So we met. Everyone gave their little egotistical speech, and we disbanded, and nothing happened. And some even had the gall to say, Khalid, don't worry. If someone sues you, we will come to your aid. Personalizing, demeaning, degrading. You look at them and say, I need nothing from you. How in God's name do you know God or justice? I need nothing from you. You will come to my aid. It is like the shaitan coming to my aid. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. اللهم اعف عنا. اللهم اغفر لنا. اللهم ارحمنا. اللهم اهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا. Allah forgive our sins. Allah grant us the path, the wisdom to attain the path, your path and the path of justice, and to see the world of Ihsan and aspire to the world of Ihsan. وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأقم الصلاة.